I flew into the small town thinking the Airbnb would just be a cheap place to stay for 2 nights. It was one of those towns that felt too quiet for its own good, with empty roads after sunset and old signs that looked like they hadn't been repainted in years. I booked the place without thinking much about it. The photos showed a clean room, a small kitchen, a balcony facing some trees. Nothing strange. Nothing that made me expect anything beyond an uneventful stay. What I didn't know was that this town had a specific, very strange law. People there treated hummingbirds like something far more important than regular birds. They weren't pets. They weren't wildlife. They were legal tender. The town had declared them a form of money decades ago, long before any modern rules stepped in. The locals followed that old law like it was sacred. I didn't understand any of it until it was too late. I wasn't even told anything when I booked the Airbnb. I only found out after things had gone wrong. The house itself was small and older than the listing made it seem. It sat at the end of a long, cracked driveway with weeds pushing through the cement. The front yard had these little metal ornaments shaped like hummingbirds stuck into the ground, almost like tiny flags marking territory. When I walked up to the porch, I noticed more hummingbird decorations. Wind chimes with wings, rusty metal cutouts nailed to the walls, even a faded mural on the side of the house that showed a giant hummingbird hovering over the town. At the time, I just thought the owner liked birds. People had weird hobbies. I didn't question it. Inside, the place smelled faintly sweet, like old sugar. There were bowls near the windows filled with red liquid, which I assumed were for regular birds. The owner had left a small guidebook on the table, one of those spiral notebook types that Airbnb hosts usually make, filled with instructions. I expected things like Wi-Fi passwords and checkout procedures, but the first page was something completely different. It said the balcony door must stay closed at all times. It also said the windows should never be left open after dusk. It said the feeder bowls were not to be touched or moved. It even warned that if a hummingbird entered the house by accident, the host must be contacted immediately. First, it made me laugh quietly to myself. Felt ridiculous. But there was something about the way it was written, no jokes, no funny tone. Just strict, clear rules like ignoring them would cause some real trouble. I didn't pay much attention though. I skimmed the pages, took a shower, cooked some quick food, and got ready for bed. I didn't bother locking the balcony door because the air felt warm and still, and I liked the fresh breeze coming in. I lay down thinking nothing was going to happen. I woke up to a faint fluttering sound. Not loud. Just small, rapid beats like something tapping lightly against the walls. At first, I didn't even open my eyes. I thought it was part of a dream. Then the sound grew sharper. It moved around the room fast, too fast to be an insect. Something brushed past my ear. A soft, quick motion that made my eyes snap open. There was a hummingbird inside my room. It shot across the air nervously, the little body trembling with each flap. Its wings were a blur. It kept slamming lightly into the glass of the window. Then it darted toward the kitchen, then back again, like it didn't understand the space and couldn't find its way out. The bowls of red liquid near the windows suddenly made sense, and for a moment I just watched the tiny thing flail through the air. I remembered the rules. I remembered the line about contacting the host immediately, but it was almost midnight. I didn't want to bother anyone, and honestly, I didn't think it mattered. It was just a tiny bird. I figured I could just guide it out. I walked toward the balcony door and slid it fully open, letting the warm night air rush in. The hummingbird didn't seem to notice. It kept darting around the ceiling, hitting the walls, spinning in circles like it was confused by everything around it. I grabbed a pillow and tried gently to push it toward the door by blocking off parts of the room. The little bird swerved violently, smacking against the door frame. It fell for a moment, then shot upward again in panic. Its movements grew messier, less controlled. I didn't realize how fragile they were. I didn't realize how easy it was for them to injure themselves. I kept trying to push it outside, but every attempt only made it panic more. Then it hit the corner of the wall hard. Hard enough that it fell straight down onto the floor. I froze. It didn't move. I bent down slowly, hoping it was only stunned. But when I got close, I saw the small trail of red leaking from its tiny body. The bird twitched once, then nothing. It lay there with one wing slightly outstretched, like it had been caught mid-motion and frozen forever. I stood there staring at it, knowing immediately that something was wrong in a way I didn't fully understand. Not just because I had killed a living thing, not just because I ignored the instructions. It was deeper than that. A quiet realization settled over me. I remembered the strange decorations outside. I remembered the guidebook's tone. I remembered the feeling that something in this town wasn't normal, but not in a supernatural way, in a legal way, in a social way, in a way that mattered. Hummingbirds were legal tender here. Felt absurd, like a joke someone would make online. But this town meant it. I didn't know how serious it was until I went to throw the tiny body away. I didn't want to keep looking at it. I opened a cabinet under the sink to grab a paper towel. And that was when I found them. Bills. Stacks of local bills the size of envelopes, marked with hummingbird symbols instead of numbers. Next to the bills was a laminated sheet explaining their value. It looked official. It looked old. It looked like something they expected everyone in town to understand. My stomach twisted. I realized then that killing the bird wasn't just killing a bird. It was like destroying currency, destroying something they treated like money. I didn't know the exact punishment. I didn't want to know. My heart started racing as I cleaned the floor. I wrapped the tiny body in a towel and slid it inside a zip-top bag, telling myself I'd hide it outside somewhere, maybe near the woods. The air felt heavy. The silence in the house felt full of pressure. I kept imagining someone watching the windows, someone tracking every move through some old tradition I didn't understand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had violated something that mattered deeply to the people here. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting at the small table with the bagged hummingbird beside me like an accusation. Every car that drove past the house made my heartbeat jump. Every shadow that moved across the walls made me tense. I had never felt scared of a tiny dead bird before, but this wasn't about the bird anymore. It was about the town, its rules, the strange sense of value. When morning came, I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my things quickly. I wiped down every surface I had touched. I closed the balcony door and locked it. I checked the floors twice to make sure no trace of blood was left. Then I took the bagged hummingbird, walked far behind the house, and buried it near a tree. I covered it with rocks and dirt, trying to make the ground look untouched. When I drove away from the Airbnb, I felt like I was escaping, like I had gotten involved in something I didn't understand, something old. Something tied to a set of laws and beliefs that didn't belong to me, but still had power over me the moment I stepped into that town. My phone buzzed halfway down the highway. It was a message from the host, saying only that they hoped I had a comfortable stay and that they would leave a review soon. Nothing else. No questions. No comments. No signs they knew anything. But the way it was worded made my stomach twist again. Felt polite. Too polite. Like they were waiting to see if I said anything first. Like they already knew something had happened, but were giving me the chance to admit it. I didn't reply. I left the town and I never booked an Airbnb there again. Sometimes I think about that night. I think about the sound of the bird's wings, the panic in its movements, the strange rules in the guidebook. And what scares me most isn't the hummingbird or the way it died. What scares me is how easily I stepped into a place where the normal rules didn't apply, where something small could turn into something serious without warning. And the ending stayed with me because it was simple but clear. I learned that danger doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a tiny bird hitting a wall. Sometimes it looks like a rule you didn't take seriously. Sometimes it looks like a quiet town with old laws that don't bend for outsiders. And sometimes the scariest thing is realizing too late that you already broke the wrong rule. I booked the Airbnb because it looked simple and cheap. I didn't need anything fancy. I just wanted a quiet place to sleep for a few nights while I visited the area for work. The photos showed a small guest house behind someone's main home. It had a single bed, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. Nothing special. The reviews were short and plain, but none of them were bad. People said things like, "Nice place" or "Good for the price." No one complained about anything strange, and that was enough for me. I arrived late in the evening after a long drive. I was tired, and my legs were stiff. The neighborhood wasn't bad, but it wasn't friendly either. The houses were spread out, with tall trees blocking the views between them. The guest house I rented was behind a large gray house with dark windows. The lights in the main house were off except for a small lamp near the back door. It didn't look like anyone was around, but I didn't care. I just wanted to check in and sleep. The guest house door had a code lock. I punched in the numbers the host had sent me. The green light blinked, and the lock opened with a dull click. The inside smelled like old wood and dust. There was a small lamp on a table near the bed. I turned it on and placed my bag down. The room felt slightly colder than outside. There was a small heater in the corner, but it made a faint rattling sound when I switched it on, so I turned it off again. I walked around to get used to the space. The bed was soft but old. The sheets looked clean, but something about them didn't feel fresh. I pulled them back and checked for stains or bugs. I didn't see anything, but I still felt a strange discomfort. The bathroom door was slightly crooked. When I pushed it open, it made a slow scraping noise across the floor. The mirror above the sink was scratched, and the small window was painted shut. The shower head had rust around the edges, and a few dark hairs were stuck in the drain. I was too tired to care. I washed my face, brushed my teeth, and got ready to sleep. Before turning off the light, I noticed something odd on the wall near the kitchen area. A small metal vent was installed right above the counter. It looked too new compared to the worn-out walls. The screws were shiny and tight. I didn't pay much attention to it at the time, but later it would bother me more than anything else in that room. I lay down on the bed and pulled the blanket over myself. The room was quiet, almost too quiet. I could hear my own breathing and the buzzing sound of the fridge turning on and off. After about 20 minutes, I started to drift into sleep. I woke up suddenly without knowing why. My heart was beating faster than normal. I opened my eyes and looked around the dark room. Nothing was moving. There were no sounds, no footsteps, no voices. But something felt wrong. It was a strange feeling, like someone had walked too close to the bed while I slept. I sat up slowly and listened. The fridge buzzed again. The wind outside shook a few leaves. Nothing else. I checked the time on my phone. It had only been 40 minutes since I fell asleep. I tried closing my eyes again, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Then I heard it. A soft click. A metallic click. It came from the vent above the kitchen counter. I stared at it in the darkness, waiting to hear it again. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then I heard a faint scraping sound, like metal touching metal. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of that small room, it felt sharp. I sat there, breathing quietly, trying to figure out what could make that sound. Maybe the vent cover was loose. Maybe the metal was cooling down. But the noise didn't sound random. It sounded like something adjusting or shifting behind the wall. I got up and walked slowly toward the kitchen. The floor creaked under my feet. When I reached the vent, I lifted my hand and touched the metal cover. Felt warm, warmer than the rest of the wall. That made no sense. I pulled my hand away and stepped back. I turned on the small kitchen light. Under the bright light, I noticed dust around the vent, except for a clean outline where the screws were. Someone had touched it recently. Someone had opened it. I felt a chill climb up my back, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was for the heater system. Maybe the host installed something new. I tried to calm myself down and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every few minutes, I opened my eyes to check the vent. Around 3 a.m., the sound happened again. This time, it wasn't a click. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something was moving behind the wall. Very slow, steady, purposeful. I sat up immediately. My throat felt tight, and my heartbeat thumped in my ears. I didn't want to get up again, but I couldn't look away from that vent. The sound grew slightly louder, then stopped. Silence filled the room again. I told myself I was half asleep and imagining things, but deep down I knew I wasn't. I stayed awake until around 4:30 a.m., sitting against the headboard with the lights on. Eventually, the exhaustion forced me to sleep again. When I woke up in the morning, the room looked normal. but something small had changed. A faint black mark was on the wall below the vent, like something had dripped or scraped down during the night. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. I walked over to check it. The mark felt like dry dust, like something from inside the wall had fallen out. I looked closely at the vent. One of the screws was different, looser, tilted. I stepped back again, this time faster. My instinct told me to leave, but my clothes and bag were scattered around the room. I packed them quickly, stuffing everything into my backpack without folding anything. As I moved around, I noticed more signs that made my stomach tighten. The bathroom mirror had a new fingerprint, a smudged one, lower than where I normally touched it. The bedsheet had a wrinkle near the foot of the bed that I didn't make. The door lock inside had tiny scratches around the knob, like someone tried turning it very slowly. I didn't think anymore. I just grabbed my backpack, ran outside, and shut the door behind me. The early morning air felt cold and sharp. The main house still looked empty. The curtains were drawn. No movement, no cars, no lights. I got into my car and drove away without looking back. When I finally stopped at a gas station 20 minutes away, I checked the Airbnb listing again. Something I hadn't noticed before now looked obvious. All the reviews were old. The newest one was from more than a year ago, and every review used the exact same simple wording, like they were written quickly without thought. I tried messaging the host just to ask about the vent, just to convince myself it was normal. The message didn't go through. Then I looked closely at the host's profile picture. It wasn't a real person. It looked like a low-quality AI face, slightly blurred, with features that didn't match perfectly. I hadn't paid attention before, but now it was clear. I reported the listing immediately. Airbnb support said they would investigate. For days after leaving, I couldn't stop thinking about the vent, the warm metal, the clean screws, the quiet footsteps I never heard but could feel, the dragging sound inside the wall, the small signs that someone was inside the guest house while I slept. Not a ghost, not anything supernatural, something far worse, a real person, someone who had access to the walls, someone who could move behind them, someone who watched guests through that vent, someone who waited, someone who might still be there, living inside that house, slipping through hidden spaces no one knew about. Even now, when I try to sleep in hotels or rentals, I always check the walls, the vents, the closets, the spaces beneath the bed. Not because I'm scared of ghosts. I'm scared of real people hiding where no one expects them. And the worst part is that no one ever contacted me about the investigation. The listing disappeared, but that doesn't mean the person behind the wall stopped. It only means they moved to a new listing, a new guest, a new vent, a new night, where someone else might wake up to the same quiet sound I heard. Metal shifting in the dark, just inches away, on the other side of a thin wall. I never liked staying at other people's houses, even if they were family. There was always this strange feeling that the walls remembered things, that the air held onto old habits and private routines. My in-laws had this habit of renting out their place on Airbnb whenever they traveled. They said it helped cover flights, hotels, and all the little things that made vacations easier. I didn't argue with them. Their house was big, clean, and near a nice hiking trail, so it stayed booked most of the year. But I always felt uneasy about strangers walking through their rooms, opening their drawers, sleeping in their beds. Maybe it was just my own paranoia, but it never felt normal to me. One time, they asked me to check on the house right after a set of guests left. They were flying back but wouldn't reach home for 2 more days. They always wanted someone to make sure everything looked fine, because Airbnb guests could be unpredictable. I agreed, thinking it would just be a quick visit. A walkthrough, a few pictures, and then I'd lock up and leave. I expected the usual mess. Maybe a few dishes, maybe some trash forgotten under the sink, maybe towels thrown in weird places. Nothing crazy. I wished that was what I actually found. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked normal on the outside. The place looked calm and quiet like it always did. But the closer I got to the front door, the more something felt off. There was this faint smell in the air. Something metallic, something that didn't belong. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like the house was holding its breath. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The first thing I noticed was the cold air rushing out. It didn't make sense because the weather was warm and the AC wasn't supposed to be running that low. When I stepped inside, a bigger problem hit me. The deck doors were wide open, both of them, not cracked open, not slightly ajar, fully wide open like someone had thrown them open to let a crowd in. And the windows beside them were open too, the curtains blowing inward like ghostly arms. Even though there was no real wind outside, I felt this tiny jolt in my stomach. My in-laws had strict rules about keeping those doors closed at night because the house was backed right up against a wooded area. Animals roamed through there all the time. Raccoons, stray cats, even the occasional fox. I didn't want to think about what else might wander in. I walked further inside, and the smell got stronger. It wasn't until I rounded the corner into the main floor that I saw it. Blood, everywhere. Not giant pools of it, not some dramatic horror movie scene, but thin trails and splatters dragged across the floor. Little streaks like something had run around in panic. Dark, dried patches near the baseboards. Smudges on the wall. Faint but impossible not to notice once you saw them. My heart dropped before I even found the source. It was lying in the middle of the living room. A bird. A big one. Maybe a crow, maybe a raven. I couldn't tell because the body looked torn up and dirty, the feathers stuck together with dried blood. It was twisted in a way that made me freeze in place for a moment, like it had fought for hours and died right where it collapsed. I tried to piece together what happened. It must have flown in during the night, attracted by the lights left on or maybe just confused. It had gotten trapped inside, panicked, slammed against the walls and windows trying to get out, bloodied itself until it couldn't keep going. And the guests just left it. They walked out, locked up, and didn't say a single word. I stood there staring at the mess, trying to understand what kind of person would see something like that and not report it. It wasn't even about the money or the cleanup. It was the fact that they walked away from a disaster inside someone else's home, pretending it wasn't there. Felt creepy in a way I couldn't explain. Not supernatural, not mysterious, just disturbing. A kind of cold, careless behavior that felt worse than something fictional. I went through the house slowly, step by step. There were feather fragments on the stairs, tiny marks on the kitchen floor, even a small smear on the sliding door handle. It had been everywhere, probably desperate to escape. The guests must have seen it. There was no way they didn't. They must have walked through these same rooms and stepped around the mess, pretending it wasn't there. I took pictures for my in-laws, knowing they would want them. Then I grabbed cleaning supplies and gloves, trying to get the place back to normal. But cleaning, it was a long, exhausting process. Every time I thought I found the last stain, I'd spot another one on a window frame or under a chair leg. It felt like the bird had fought until the very last second, leaving a trail of its fear across every part of the main floor. By the time I finished, hours had passed. My back hurt, my hands were shaking a little, and the smell of cleaning chemicals clung to my clothes. But the thing that bothered me the most wasn't the mess. It was the silence. This sense that something had unfolded inside the house, something frantic and violent, while the people staying there simply ignored it. That night, I kept thinking about what they saw, what went through their minds when they woke up to the chaos. Did they stand there staring at the bird's body? Did they step over it? Did they argue about whether to mention it or just leave? Or did they feel nothing at all? That possibility bothered me the most. The idea that someone could witness something like that and feel absolutely nothing. 2 days later, my in-laws came home. They were shocked, angry, confused. They couldn't understand how something like that happened or how the guests kept quiet about it. I didn't blame them. I felt the same way. Still thinking about the moment I stepped inside and saw the doors wide open like someone had been trying to escape. After that day, I couldn't walk into their house without remembering the scene. The open doors, the dried streaks, the twisted body. It made me think about how fragile things were inside a house. How quickly something could turn into chaos. How people could cause damage without even lifting a hand, sometimes just by doing nothing at all. But the part that stayed with me the most was the quiet cruelty of their silence. Not an act of cruelty, not a malicious one, just cold, careless indifference. And that, in its own way, felt scarier than anything else that could have happened. Because nothing about that situation was supernatural or mysterious. It was just real life. And real life can be horrifying when people stop caring. In the end, I realized something important. Houses can be cleaned. Floors can be scrubbed. Walls can be washed. But the feeling of walking into a place where something struggled and died while others pretended it didn't happen, that doesn't leave as easily. It lingers in the back of your mind. It makes you look twice at simple things. It makes you think about who you trust to walk into your home. That day changed the way I saw Airbnb, the way I saw strangers, and even the way I saw the house itself. Because once you witness something that raw, something that careless, you don't forget it. You carry it with you, like a quiet warning. And every time I think about it, I still hear myself saying the same thing my in-laws said when they saw the photos. What kind of people just walk away from something like that? What kind of people pretend nothing happened? And why does that kind of silence feel scarier than anything else? I used to work customer service for Airbnb, the late-night shift, the one nobody really wanted because it meant hours of silence followed by sudden moments of panic when something went wrong. Most nights were easy. People asking about passwords, keys, check-in times, small damages. Annoying but simple. I got used to the quiet hum of my computer, the dim glow of the desk lamp, and the feeling that I was awake inside a world everyone else had already left behind for the night. I always thought the job was harmless, just problems on a screen far away from me. But there was one night that didn't feel like that. One night where everything felt too real. It was around 4 a.m. I had been drinking lukewarm coffee and trying to keep my eyes open. The building was dead silent except for the soft buzz of fluorescent lights. I was the only one on that part of the floor. I remember the air in the room felt strangely cold for some reason, like the AC kicked in harder than usual. I was half asleep, scrolling through notes from earlier calls when the phone lit up. The caller ID showed a guest from a small rental outside the city. I didn't think much of it. Late-night calls usually meant lockouts or confusion with instructions. I put on my headset and answered, expecting the usual tired voice. Instead, what came through was raw panic. No screams, just heavy breathing, shaking breath, the kind someone lets out when they are trying to hold themselves together and failing. The guest spoke in short, broken statements. They said the place they rented was burning down. Not smoking, not catching fire. Burning down. Fully. Right now. I straightened in my chair so fast my back cracked. I felt myself waking up instantly. I asked for the address, and they rattled it off fast, like they had repeated it 1,000 times while running. I heard crackling in the background. Real crackling. Not phone static. And then something loud, like a beam collapsing somewhere near them. I could almost feel the heat through the phone, even though I knew that wasn't possible. The panic in their breathing told me enough. I collected the basic information, the stuff we were trained to get, and told them emergency services needed to be called. They said the fire trucks were already on the way. They kept saying they didn't know what happened. They said they were outside on the gravel driveway watching flames climb out of the windows like it had happened in seconds. They said the smoke filled the place too fast for them to understand anything. They sounded like someone trying to put their thoughts together after getting punched in the face. By the time the call ended, my hands were shaking a little. I tried to write out the incident report, but my mind kept going back to the noise I heard. The sound of wood breaking, the strange rushing sound of fire that only happens when it catches onto something big. It didn't feel like listening to a call. It felt like standing there with them. I barely had 20 minutes to process any of it before the phone lit up again. This time, it was the host. When I picked up the call, their voice was sharp, fast, and angry in a way that was mixed with pure disbelief. They said their property was burning down. They said they had security alerts from the cameras showing smoke at first, then flames taking over the whole left side of the building. They said they had no idea what the guests did in there. They kept repeating that it was their family home, that it took them years to fix up, and they said it was gone. The more I listened, the more I realized something strange. The host didn't actually know the guests had called. The two calls were completely separate. They weren't trying to argue or blame each other in that moment. They were just reacting to something terrible happening at the same time. I wasn't supposed to choose a side. My job wasn't to figure out who did what. Not at 4 a.m., not ever. My job was to log the details, send it to the right teams, and stay calm. But when I hung up, the room didn't feel calm. The silence felt heavy. I couldn't shake the fact that I had listened to both sides of a disaster unfolding in real time. And somewhere out there in the dark, a house really was burning. The official reports that came in later were vague. They always were. Someone wrote that the fire department arrived to find the structure mostly engulfed. Someone else wrote that the walls collapsed inward before they could enter. Someone noted that the fire spread too fast to determine the source with certainty. That line bothered me, the part about spreading too fast. Houses don't usually go up like that unless something accelerates it. The guests claimed they were asleep when the fire started. They said they woke up to the smell of smoke and saw orange light under the door. They insisted they didn't use candles, didn't cook late, didn't touch the old fireplace the host left for decoration. Just normal stuff. Phone chargers, a laptop, normal electricity. The host, on the other hand, brought up an old wiring issue they had supposedly fixed last year. They said it should not have caused anything. They also mentioned the guests left a pan out earlier in the kitchen camera footage, cold, but still strange. They said the guests smoked outside earlier in the evening. They said they didn't trust that. Both sides sounded believable in their own way. Both sounded desperate. But the fact remained. The place burned down. That was the one solid truth in a sea of confusion. Weeks passed. The case went to some department above me, something with more authority. I never heard what they concluded. Cases like these usually get buried in paperwork, emails, back and forth claims. Insurance gets involved. Lawyers step in. I don't think anyone ever really knows the truth except the people who were there in the moment, and even they might not fully understand it. But the call stayed with me. The sounds stayed with me. After that night, something changed about how I felt at work. Before, everything on the phone felt far away. Stories happening somewhere else, never touching me. But that night, the distance disappeared. I couldn't stop thinking about how fast things can go wrong inside a home. How a quiet place can turn into something deadly in minutes. How people you will never meet can be living through something terrifying while your headset presses against your ear and you sit in a bright office far away from their panic. I started noticing things I never cared about before. Every time I cooked at home, I watched the stove longer than I needed to. I checked outlets twice before bed. I felt my heart speed up whenever I smelled smoke from someone grilling outside. And on my next shift, when the phone rang at 3 a.m., I felt a jolt of fear before I even answered, thinking I'd hear that same crackling again. What really stuck with me was not the mystery of who was responsible. It was the way everything unfolded so fast. A home someone trusted strangers with turned into a pile of ash. A family renting a peaceful place for the night ran out into the cold darkness with only the clothes on their backs. And I sat in an office chair, listening to the moment where the world split open for two different people who had never met. There was no dramatic plot twist, no hidden monster, no strange force behind it, just a fire, a real one, and the truth that once flames start moving through a house, there is nothing you can do but run. In the end, what I learned from that night was painfully simple. No matter how careful you think people are, no matter how routine the job feels, no matter how many safe nights pass, things can go wrong in ways you can't predict. A quiet shift can turn into the heaviest night of your life. A rental can turn into ruins in less than 20 minutes. And the clearest truth of all, the part that stayed in my mind long after the calls ended, was this: sometimes you don't get answers. Sometimes you don't get closure. Sometimes all you get is the knowledge that the place really did burn down, and you were one of the first people to hear the fear in their voices as it happened. That alone is enough to change the way you look at every house you walk into afterward. I booked the house through a company that was basically the same thing as Airbnb. The listing looked harmless. A clean house, a quiet neighborhood, a backyard pool, and a tiki hut beside it that looked like something you would see in a vacation ad. The photos made everything look peaceful. I needed a break from work, so I thought staying there for a few days would help me reset. I read the reviews. Nothing stood out as weird. A few people said the place was nice or good spot. That was enough. When I arrived, the house looked the same as the pictures, maybe a bit older, maybe a bit more worn down, but still normal. The backyard was bigger than I expected. The tiki hut stood at the far corner of the yard, built with thick wooden poles and a thatched roof. It looked handmade, almost too handmade, like someone tried building it themselves instead of hiring a professional. But I didn't think anything of it at the time. The owner wasn't there. He used a remote check-in. The door code worked fine. The place smelled like sunscreen and chlorine, like a family had stayed there before me. Everything inside was plain but fine. No red flags. I dropped my bags, walked through the house, checked the pool, walked under the tiki hut just to see it up close, and then left to meet my friends for the day. We were gone for more than 6 hours. When we came back, the sun was already lower in the sky. The house looked calm from the outside, exactly the same way we left it. But the moment I walked into the backyard, I stopped so fast the person behind me bumped into me. The tiki hut was burning. Not a small fire. It was completely engulfed in flames. The entire roof falling apart piece by piece, sparks flying into the air like someone had thrown gasoline on it. Thick black smoke rolled upward, curling into the sky. The heat hit my face the second I stepped outside. Felt unreal. We had just been gone. There was no reason for anything to be burning. There had been no wind, no rain, no lightning, nothing. The fire was so big it looked like it had been burning for a long time. I froze for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was looking at. My brain kept saying the same thing. How is this possible? We locked the house. No one came into the backyard. Nothing was plugged in under the hut. It had no lights, no outlets, no grill, nothing electrical at all. I ran back inside the house for my phone and tried calling the owner. He didn't answer. I tried again and again. Still nothing. I left him multiple voicemails. My chest felt tight each time the call went to voicemail. I tried calling the fire department next. Even they were delayed in picking up because the number kept rerouting. When I finally reached someone, they said they would send a crew, but it could take a while due to a big accident happening across town. I stood in the backyard watching the flames eat the last pieces of the hut, feeling helpless. The wooden poles snapped one by one, collapsing inward. The entire structure turned into a glowing pile of burning debris. Ash spread across the pool water like gray snow. Everything smelled like burnt wood and chemicals. I kept trying the owner again. Again, nothing. At this point, I started to feel something different from panic. Something colder. Something that made the back of my neck tighten. It didn't make sense that a tiki hut with no electricity and no people around would catch fire by itself. Something was wrong. Really wrong. Just in case, I called the booking company. I didn't even know why I did it, but a part of me felt like I had to tell someone official, someone who could log the issue or at least confirm I wasn't losing my mind. The support person took the call and said they would notify their emergency team. By the time the fire department arrived, the tiki hut was nothing more than a smoking pile of black wood and ash. They sprayed water across the backyard, turning the pool dark and cloudy. The firefighters walked around asking questions, writing things down, taking photos. I kept explaining that we were gone for more than 6 hours. No one had used the yard. No one had cooked anything. The hut had no power. One of the firefighters gave me a long look that I didn't understand at first. It wasn't suspicion. It was something closer to sympathy mixed with irritation. Another firefighter walked over carrying a piece of charred wood and shook his head. They exchanged a glance. I didn't know what it meant then, but later I realized why they looked that way. The owner finally called me back. Not during the fire. Not while the flames were huge. He called after everything was already destroyed and the fire department had left. He asked me to meet him at the house immediately. His voice sounded calm, but not the kind of calm that comes from being level-headed. It was the kind of calm that comes from planning something before speaking. He arrived 20 minutes later, a big man with dark circles under his eyes and a stiff, forced smile. When he stepped into the backyard and saw the mess, he didn't react the way a normal landlord or host would. No shock, no stress, No panic. No anger. His face didn't move at all. He stared at the burned remains like he already knew what he'd find. He walked around the ashes slowly, studying everything too closely. Then he pulled out his phone and took pictures, but not of the damage, of the angles that made it look like the fire started from inside the tiki hut instead of the roof or the wooden beams. The whole time he kept pacing, staring at the ground, lifting pieces of burnt wood with careful movements. And that same cold feeling I had earlier came back even stronger. This didn't feel like a normal house fire. It felt like a setup, planned one. Later, after he talked to the firefighters, after he walked through the yard pretending to inspect things, he handed me a clipboard with papers on it. They were forms he said I needed to sign about the damage. But the papers didn't look like normal reports. They looked like contracts, weirdly simple ones. No company header, no official formatting, just blank sheets with typed statements that sounded like they were written in a rush. I skimmed over them and felt my stomach drop. The papers said the damage happened while the renter was in occupancy, and that the renter accepts responsibility for unforeseen damages to external property structures. I didn't sign anything. I stepped back and told him I needed to read things carefully first. His face tightened slightly, even though he tried to hide it. He stood there, motionless, holding the clipboard, waiting like he expected me to sign right away. His body language felt wrong, felt like pressure without words. I could tell he wanted me to sign immediately because something was wrong with those papers. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound in the house felt sharper. Every shadow made me uncomfortable. It felt like the owner could show up at any time, knock on the door, push more papers at me, try something else. My mind kept replaying the image of the burning hut, the clean flames, the even way it burned, like someone had poured something flammable onto it before we ever got back. The next morning, the fire department called me again. One of the firefighters said they had finished their preliminary inspection. And even though they didn't directly accuse the owner, they said something that made the truth clear. They said the structure wasn't even permitted. No safety rating, no inspection, no treatment on the wood, no protective barrier on the thatch roof, and worse, no insurance coverage. That was the moment everything made sense. The owner didn't want the structure to burn because it was valuable. He wanted it to burn because it wasn't covered. And if he could make it look like the renter caused the fire, insurance or no insurance didn't matter. He could get money directly from someone who didn't know any better. Someone like me. The firefighters even hinted that they suspected he'd been trying the same trick before, but until someone didn't fall for the scam, nothing could be proven. The next day, the booking company contacted me and said they had opened a fraud investigation. I sent them photos, videos, timestamps, everything. The owner tried contacting me several more times, but I blocked every number. I left the house early and checked into a hotel for the rest of my stay, just so I wouldn't have to be anywhere near that backyard or its owner ever again. In the end, the company removed his listing. The fire report officially classified the cause as suspicious, human-influenced, and under investigation. The owner never got a cent from me, not from insurance either. Whatever he planned, it didn't work. But the memory of that night stayed with me, because the scariest part wasn't the fire itself. It was realizing that someone tried to trap me into taking the blame for something they caused. Someone who didn't care who got hurt. Someone who watched their own structure burn and waited for the perfect moment to push the blame onto a stranger. That fear is different. It's not the kind you forget. It's the kind that reminds you that sometimes the most dangerous thing waiting for you on a trip isn't a ghost or a creature. It's a real person with a plan, standing just out of sight, waiting for you to make the wrong move. And once you see that kind of danger up close, you never look at a vacation rental the same way again. I had been traveling for work and decided to book a small Airbnb on the outskirts of a mid-sized town. It was the kind of place that looked perfect in photos. An old two-story house with a little porch and a fenced backyard. The price was cheap, the host had good reviews, and the area seemed quiet. I was exhausted from the long drive, so I didn't pay much attention to anything unusual when I pulled into the driveway just after sunset. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Too quiet. There were no cars, no kids playing, no dogs barking. Just me, the house, and the faint hum of the streetlights down the road. The interior of the Airbnb looked exactly like the pictures. Cozy furniture, soft lighting, a small kitchen stocked with basic appliances, and a few personal touches from the host. Plants on the windowsills, books stacked neatly on a shelf, a handwritten welcome note. I unpacked my things quickly, thinking I'd just crash for the night and explore the town in the morning. I didn't know much about the area, and there wasn't much around the house. The nearest convenience store was a 20-minute drive away, and the next house over was at least 100 meters away, partially hidden behind tall bushes. At first, the isolation felt peaceful, like a quiet escape from the city. But as the sun went down and the shadows in the yard grew longer, that peaceful feeling started to twist into unease. The first thing that really bothered me was the front door. I had locked it when I came in, but later, while I was brushing my teeth in the tiny bathroom, I heard a faint creak, like the sound of a door opening very slowly. My stomach tightened. The bathroom door was closed, but I could hear the faint scrape of wood on the floor. I paused and listened. Silence. My first thought was that it had been the wind, though the windows were shut tight. Still, I made sure the locks were secure and double-checked all the doors before going to bed. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I heard a bump or a creak, I woke up and sat in bed, staring at the dark corners of the room. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again, this time louder and coming from downstairs. It was like someone dragging something across the floor, slow and deliberate. My heart was racing, and I felt a cold sweat on my back. I wanted to call the host, but something told me that might make things worse if there was actually someone in the house. I told myself I was imagining it. Old houses make noises. I had stayed in plenty of them before. I forced myself to get up and peek down the stairs. Everything looked normal. The living room was dim, lit only by the streetlight filtering through the curtains. I waited, holding my breath, listening for any sound. Nothing. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I tried to distract myself with work. I opened my laptop and set up in the living room, hoping the daylight would make the house feel less oppressive. As I worked, I noticed something strange. The small kitchen drawers were slightly open. Not all of them, just a few. At first, I thought maybe I had left them like that, but I distinctly remembered closing everything. I closed them again and made a mental note to check the locks on the cabinets and the fridge. Around midday, I decided to step outside to get some fresh air. The backyard was overgrown, with tall grass and weeds along the fence. I noticed that some of the plants on the porch had been moved. Not a huge amount, just slightly, as if someone had brushed past them. My unease grew. I walked around the yard slowly, inspecting the perimeter. There were no footprints, no signs of someone being there. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. That evening, I cooked a small dinner and tried to calm down. I kept the lights on, double-checked the locks again, and even placed a chair under the doorknob for extra security. But around 11 p.m., it happened again. Footsteps. They were coming from upstairs, deliberate and heavy. I froze, listening. My first thought was that maybe the floorboards in the upstairs bedrooms had settled, but the pattern of the steps didn't match anything structural. It sounded like someone pacing. Fast, then slow, then stopping. I grabbed my phone and considered calling the police, but I wasn't sure if I'd be taken seriously. Then I remembered the host had mentioned a security camera outside for guest safety. I opened the app on my phone to check the feed. The front and backyards were empty. I exhaled slowly, relieved, but then I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint shadow passing the window upstairs. I couldn't make out a figure, just a dark movement. My stomach sank. This was no wind, no floorboard settling. Someone had been inside the house while I was downstairs. I stayed up all night, barely sleeping, waiting and watching. I didn't hear anything else until the next morning, when I decided to leave early. I packed quickly, skipping breakfast, trying not to make any noise. As I loaded my car, I glanced back at the house and noticed that one of the kitchen drawers I had closed was wide open again. I didn't want to touch it. Driving away, I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe the host had a maintenance person who occasionally came by without telling me, or maybe previous guests had returned. I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. The important thing was that I was leaving. Later, when I reported the incident to Airbnb, the host was polite but surprised. They claimed nobody else had access during my stay. Airbnb offered a partial refund, but the experience had shaken me far more than money could fix. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had been asleep, or if the person upstairs had decided to confront me. Weeks later, I checked local news online and found a story that made my blood run cold. There had been a string of burglaries in that area, specifically targeting Airbnb rentals. In every case, the thieves would enter quietly, often when guests were present, sometimes staying in the home for hours, going through drawers, cabinets, and personal belongings. The pattern matched exactly what I had experienced. After that, I never stayed in another Airbnb in an unfamiliar, isolated area without checking security measures and reviews obsessively. I bought a portable door lock and a small personal alarm for trips. I learned the hard way that even places that look safe online can be dangerous in reality. The fear I felt in that house stayed with me for weeks, a reminder that being cautious isn't paranoia, it's survival. Now, whenever I see a listing in a quiet neighborhood or a small, isolated house, I picture that upstairs room, the heavy footsteps, and the slightly moved drawers. And I know I made the right choice leaving when I did. That house could have ended badly if I had ignored the warning signs. I had booked the Airbnb on a last-minute whim. I was on a solo trip, driving across a stretch of highway that cut through endless farmland, small towns, and patches of woods. My phone had been losing signal for hours, and by the time I saw the listing, it was the only place available within a reasonable distance. The photos online looked decent, clean, spacious, a little old-fashioned, but nothing alarming. The host seemed friendly enough, and the price was fair. I thought it would be fine just one night. The driveway to the house was long and narrow, flanked by tall hedges that blocked the street view. When I pulled up, I noticed the mailbox was slightly tilted, and the paint on the front door was chipped. The porch light flickered as I stepped out of the car. I told myself it was just an old bulb, nothing more. I grabbed my bag and walked up the steps. The air smelled sharp and cold, like wet concrete after a rain, mixed with the faint mustiness of an older building. The front door opened easily. No one greeted me. Inside, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the air smelled faintly of cleaning products mixed with something I couldn't identify. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was strange, like the house was trying to smell fresh but couldn't quite cover up its age. The space was well lit, though the overhead lights had a dull hum. The furniture was dated but neat, nothing broken or obviously dirty. I set my bag down and started exploring the main floor. The living room had a large couch, a coffee table with magazines stacked neatly, and a small television on a stand. The kitchen was narrow but tidy, with a table pushed against the wall. I opened the fridge. It was empty except for a few bottles of water and a carton of milk. The cabinets were all closed. I didn't notice anything unusual at first. The bedroom was upstairs. The stairs groaned under my weight, each step making me more aware of how quiet the house was. The bedroom was simple. A bed with a comforter that looked freshly washed, a dresser, and a small window with blinds. The window faced the back of the property, which was surrounded by thick trees. It was almost completely dark outside, except for the faint glow of a distant street lamp. I set my bag on the chair and tried to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I kept telling myself it was just tiredness, nothing more. After a long day of driving, I wanted to relax. I changed into more comfortable clothes, plugged in my phone to charge, and sat on the bed for a few minutes, scrolling through messages. That's when I noticed it. A soft tapping noise coming from the floor below. At first, I thought it was the pipe settling, or maybe a small branch hitting the window outside. But the tapping was rhythmic, slow, deliberate. I froze and listened. It wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the house. My stomach sank. The house wasn't supposed to have anyone else in it. I told myself I must be imagining things, that I was just tired, that the sound was probably something ordinary. I went to the railing and looked down. The living room was empty. Nothing had moved. I checked the kitchen, the dining area, completely still. I went back upstairs, but the tapping didn't stop. It shifted, moving from the main floor toward the back of the house, then paused. I could hear it faintly above me, almost like someone walking lightly on the floorboards, but I couldn't see anyone. My heart was racing, my hands were clammy. I tried to breathe slowly and rationalize it. Maybe the host was doing some maintenance. Maybe it was a neighbor walking outside and the sound carried strangely through the floor. I decided to stay in the bedroom, lock the door, and keep my phone close. The tapping stopped for a while, but then another sound started. A quiet scraping against the wall, just below the window. My eyes darted to the spot, but I couldn't see anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, my ears straining for any detail. The scraping continued intermittently, slow and deliberate, as if someone was testing the strength of the walls. I thought about calling the host, but the phone still had weak signal. I didn't want to risk leaving the room alone either. The lights in the house were on, but they didn't make me feel safer. Shadows stretched across the walls, and every small sound became amplified. The creak of the ceiling fan, the whisper of the air vent, the distant hum of a car passing far down the road. My mind started racing with all the possibilities, none of them comforting. Hours seemed to pass. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. I sat on the bed, every noise making me flinch, every shadow making me look over my shoulder. At one point, I heard something move just outside the bedroom door. It wasn't fast, it didn't pound or rush, but it was methodical, slow, like someone testing the latch, checking if it would open. My pulse spiked. I grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table and held it ready, listening as the movement stopped and retreated back down the hallway. Morning came. Light leaked through the blinds, softening the dark corners of the room. I was exhausted but had to leave. I didn't care about breakfast or sightseeing anymore. I packed my things quickly, careful not to drop anything. I checked the locks on the doors as I went, making sure the main door was secured before heading out. Outside, the yard was empty. The neighborhood was quiet, but the calm didn't reassure me. It just reminded me how isolated I had been. I saw the host's car parked in the driveway, empty. Nothing about the property seemed abnormal now in the daylight, but the memory of the tapping, the scraping, and the slow movement near the bedroom door lingered in my mind. My hands were still shaking as I put my bag in the trunk. I got in my car and started driving. I didn't look back. The road ahead was empty, the morning sun rising behind me. I replayed the night in my mind, analyzing every sound, every shadow, every small detail. There was no evidence that anyone had been there, no sign of forced entry, nothing except my own fear and the sounds I had heard. And yet, I knew they were real. Someone had been in the house with me, someone patient, someone deliberate. By the time I reached the next town, I realized I would never use that Airbnb again. I made a mental rule. No more last-minute bookings in isolated places. No more ignoring my gut instincts about a property. That night had been a warning I didn't want to test again. The ending is clear. I never returned, never stayed in another Airbnb alone in a remote area without checking every detail. I double-checked every lock, every window, every possible way someone could enter before I unpacked or even considered relaxing. I changed my travel habits completely. The house itself faded from memory as I focused on safer routines, but the fear of being alone in that quiet, patient environment stayed with me for a long time. I had survived the night, and that was enough to change how I approached every future trip. Even now, when I see a listing that seems perfect, I check every review, every detail, every photo, and I trust my instincts first, because I know what it's like to feel completely alone, with someone else quietly testing the boundaries of your safety. And I'll never forget it.